Hello, chess friends, and welcome to Azadov's chess channel, and welcome to the round 9 of the Magnus Carlsen Invitational tournament in 2020. So, today's most interesting game, I think, is the game between Magnus Carlsen, the world champion, against Anish Giri. Anish Giri is not playing a great tournament so far. He has 0 points. But he had also some winning chances in previous rounds, so maybe he can improve. But today he faced the Shark, Magnus Carlsen. The first game from the four rapid games ended in a draw. Now it was Magnus Carlsen with the white pieces. We had again a great Ragozin defense, so let's see what happened in the game. We have d4 played by Magnus Carlsen. So knight to f6, c4, after e6, the East Indian setup, and now after knight to f3, which is now the most often played line, knight to f3, counter Nimzo Indian setup. After bishop to b4, we don't have to put our knight on c3, we can put our knight on d2, never risk this doubling pawn situation on the c file. So in the game d5, which transposes into a queen's gambit decline, and now Magnus played the move knight to c3. We have bishop to b4, now the Ragozin variation. And the Ragozin, I think, I mentioned it many times before, is really one of the best openings you can choose for black against d4. In the game, Magnus played c takes d5, a takes d5, and we have now a position. We'll reach also in a couple of moves the same position in like the game between Magnus Carlsen against Alireza Firouzja, in which Magnus Carlsen, after e takes d5, pulled off this move bishop to f4. It allows now Anish Giri to play the spinning idea, now rook to c1, protecting everything, and now knight to c6, which was also played by Alireza Firouzja. It's really a good opening. You see, we have already, from black's perspective, sort of an activity. In the game, Magnus played knight to d2, challenging the knight on e4, and here we have this very aggressive g5, which is really sort of now main line of the Ragozin. You cannot take, of course, your bishop is hanging, that's why bishop to e3, and now here knight takes c3 was played, b takes c3, and now bishop to a3, which was also played by Alireza Firouzja with his black pieces, and now rook to b1. This rook to b1 will play a very important role as it attacks here the b7 pawn, so the bishop is always a little bit stuck here in the defense. If you, for instance, play something like b6, then always you risk some queen to a4 ideas with some pinning ideas on the knight and also on the bishop on a3. So that's why here f5, also played by Alireza against Magnus. f5, very aggressive move. You're basically forced to play the move g3. And now bishop to d6, we have now reached already a critical moment of the game, because here Magnus played a very risky move, rook to g1. And it seems now that this bishop is trapped, because f4 is a serious threat. But if black plays here the move f4, it leads now into a very complicated game. After g takes f4, we have g takes f4, bishop takes f4 is sort of a possibility. Now after bishop takes f4, e3 is dangerous, because you're attacking the bishop, and we have also opportunities to attack the king with queen to h5. So black would be forced probably here to play the move queen to e7. After queen to h5, the king has to move to d8. If the king moves here to d7, then you risk some queen to f5, queen takes f4 ideas, so it's not a possibility. So here black would be forced to play the move king to d8, and after queen takes d5, here maybe the best way to proceed for black is simply to play bishop to d6, but still it's a very dangerous game, as white has this very tricky move c4. Bishop to e6 would be sort of a possibility. After queen to e4, I think white can continue here. Still this pawn is hanging, you would be forced to do something. So it's a very risky line that Magnus Carlsen pulled off here. We have an opportunity to take another pawn here on b7. So although down a piece, you see black's king is endangered, we have some possibilities to play the move d5. Many ideas here. Bishop to d7 would be probably now the best move for black after trades of queens. Okay, white could take maybe the b pawn, but still black can take even this h2 pawn. So tricky stuff already. After the move rook to g1, here Anish Giri played castling, and now we have h4 by Magnus. Very annoying move. If you, for instance, try here g4, then I think bishop to g2 is very dangerous, as we're attacking already this d5 pawn. And here also queen to b3 is a possibility. You see bishop to e6, as I said, is not a possibility, as we can always take this pawn on b7. So again, it would be very, very risky. You don't have any threats on the b file because the knight is protecting the rook on b1. So still a dynamic game, and here I really liked what Anish Giri played, because most of the times it seems to me that Anish Giri is really a great player, but sometimes he is going into these position lines, he is not counterplaying sometimes. Here in this game he played really a great counter attack with the move f4. Okay, let's have an open game. It's really a great tournament. I have 0 points, so I can basically do whatever I like. The tournament was bad anyway for me, so now let's play really a dynamic game against the world champion. f4, cracking the position, and Magnus pulled off g takes f4, and now we have g4. Very, very interesting idea by Anish Giri. Okay, we can take always this pawn on f4 in a couple of moves, but this space advantage here on g4 is very, very important. This pawn is really an annoying one. You see, if you try to challenge this pawn with moves as f3, you get queen takes h4. And here Magnus pulled off, I think, his first inaccuracy in the game. Rook to b5 is very, very risky because you want to play queen to b3, I think, is much better, or even c4. Here after the move g5, here c4 I think is much better, because you're already opening here the light square diagonal in front of black's king. It's much more powerful. Or queen to b3, you see, because we would have sort of a double attack. Not that we are only attacking here this d5, we're attacking also the b7, and the more important thing is that the queen would be on the same diagonal like the king. So here I think Magnus pull off this very, very risky move, rook to b5, trying to stay maybe with the queen on this diagonal if the queen could somehow get into the game. But here Anish Giri played a very natural move, knight to d7, and Magnus pulled off again a very tricky move, which was again sort of an inaccuracy. I think here Anish Giri should have proceeded with a very dangerous g3. He has the opportunity after g3, knight takes g3, knight takes f5, attacking the pawn on g3. He didn't play this in the game. If bishop to f4, then king to h8, I think solves all of the positional problems. Of course, you can take here, or you can take this pawn, but here I think white is living in danger here, because the king is still stuck in the center. Or we could try after this move f5, of course, here first c4 or similar ideas, but then knight to f5. In the game, Anish Giri played here a very calm move, h5, which basically wasn't the best of choices. The problem is, if you take here with bishop to f5, it seems like a logical move, but then you get bishop to h6, rook to f7 would be the possible continuation, but now e4. That's the main tactical idea that Magnus Carlsen has prepared here. After something like, I don't know, d takes e4, we have bishop to c4. Again, this rook would be very, very endangered. If you try to hide with your rook maybe here on e8, then again this e4, and the problem is you cannot take with the pawn here. The bishop would be hanging. Many tactical possibilities. Even again this bishop to c4 idea works. We have also some tactical threats here to play something like rook takes g4, queen takes g4. So you see, maybe Anish Giri didn't see the most accurate line, but at least he saw this h5 line. Again, if you take with the knight here, rook takes g5, g4 will happen. Again, the king would be endangered. He tried this move h5, and now Magnus played this natural bishop to g5 idea. And this game is already dangerous now. Now c6 finally by Anish Giri, kicking away this annoying rook. I'm just pointing you out that Magnus really missed this move, queen to b3. This queen to b3 would be much more powerful, so it would be really dangerous. Here, rook to b2, Magnus tried to stay with this rook on the second rank, as he probably noticed that something could happen around this f2. this g3 idea of Anish Giri is still a dangerous one. And here rook takes f5. Now finally Anish Giri has, I think, a good position here. The rook is very dangerous here. This f2 is a long-term weakness, and now Magnus pull off this e4 move, which he basically prepared. But now rook takes g5, and this is this accurate move that Anish Giri played. Great rook sacrifice, because after h takes g5, this pawn structure is very healthy, so it's not a problem. We'll take this g5 pawn whenever we like, but first it's time to regroup. After the move h takes g5, here Anish Giri played this accurate move again, knight to g6, forcing a little bit Magnus to calculate everything, because after something like e takes d4, this is a serious threat, because this knight will come onto this very active square f4 and followed with queen to g5. White is really endangered here. So in the game, bishop e5, bishop to f8, played by Anish Giri, simply retreating with the bishop, but staying very active with his pieces, because, as I said, we will take this pawn on g5, and this bishop's activity is also a good one. Now, if we, for instance, take this pawn, now our main goal is maybe to simply push these pawns in front of the king, because Magnus has still the king in the center, which is very dangerous. Bishop to d3, here comes the move knight to f4, attacking the bishop, and here comes knight to f1, played by Magnus. Maybe a better idea is simply retreating with the bishop here, trying to maybe get the queen again on b3. In the game, knight to f1 was played, and now finally queen takes g5. And here Magnus played, I think, the main mistake in the game. It's really a blunder. Again, bishop to b1, maybe trying bishop to queen to c2, trying some checkmate threats, or even queen to b3, some kind of a counter attack. Here he played the move f3, and basically this was game over, because after knight takes d3, we have queen takes d3, and now queen to c1. Magnus really missed this tactic. I think he had some 3 minutes on the clock. We have king to f2, and now Anish Giri simply one piece up. Let's see the continuation, knight to d2. Here another great move by Anish Giri, deflecting the queen from the defense. Very nice tactic here. Bishop, queen takes f5, queen takes d2. Now king to g3, again another problem. Here Anish Giri simply took some pawns. You cannot even open here this G file, because here, as I said, Anish Giri has a perfect pawn chain here in the game. Rook to g3, but not a problem. Bishop to g7, f4, played by Magnus, trying to get these two pawns connected. But here, after rook to f8, Magnus Carlsen resigned, because in the next move you lose your very important pawn on f4, and it was game over. So I didn't expect this to happen. Magnus with the white pieces pull off here this very risky move f3, knight takes d3, followed with queen to c1. It was game over. As I said, bishop to b1 would be a better idea, with queen to c2 ideas, at least trying to regroup somehow, maybe even sacrifice the exchange back, trying to get some kind of activity. But this rook to g1 idea in the first place, I think, wasn't the natural move. Magnus should have proceeded maybe with castling g3, like he played in the game against Alireza, make these inaccuracies and mistakes and got punished. Congratulations, of course, to Anish Giri. He played a very nice sacrifice on with this rook. Great tactics, pull off, activated his pieces, realized this endangered king possibly. So okay, we'll see what will happen in the next couple of games. Magnus has to win now one in order to make it to the Armageddon game. See you soon with some more videos. Meanwhile, you can watch my other commented chess games with some more games from this tournament, and you can also watch my best chess games of all time. We'll see you a couple of moments. Chess is the best, of course.